Welcome back to Run Through Presents Gone Running. It is Ben Shepherd here, and today's guest is Jonny Davies. Jonny has got a huge following across TikTok and Instagram and pumps out incredible running content. His running journey was a little bit different. He actually came to running later on in life from a gym and lifting background, and now puts out a load of content about how you can potentially balance the two as well. He is also about to embark on an incredible challenge on the 7th of September. Jonny is going to begin running the London Tube map. So he's going to run every station, every line. That's 272 stations, 572 kilometers over 8 days. Of course, we get into that in this conversation, as well as chatting about many other things, including Jonny's journey into running, how he thinks you can do what he's done as well, and why he loves it so much. So I do hope you enjoy this conversation here on Run Through Presents Gone Running.
So my name is Jonny Davies. I'm 30 years old, based in London, or known as JD Runs Far on TikTok. I'm an ultra runner, not a typical ultra runner. I'm 100 kilos, 6'4", so sort of breaking the stereotypes of what a typical ultra runner or even a runner sort of looks like. And yeah, I've been running 3 years now. Started running sort of in and out of lockdown. Didn't have a clue what I was doing. Struggled to run 5K, and now preparing for a 572 kilometer ultra marathon in and around the streets of London, running the entire London Underground over 11 days.
We'll definitely get into that, but let's go back to the start then. 3 years ago, when you laced up those trainers for the first time, what was kind of the catalyst behind that?
I was on a work trip to Canada just before COVID. I remember it was 3 and a bit years ago, I must say. So it was the January as COVID was starting to become a thing. I was on a work trip to Vancouver, middle of winter, and never really ran before. I played rugby, and I'm pretty into my sports and obviously gym, but the idea of running any sort of distance had never appealed to me. And I was having a terrible trip. Like, I had a bunch of work to do. The hours were awful. The people I was meeting out there were not great either. And I was like, I woke up at 5 a.m, half jet lagged, and I thought, you know what? Let's just see how far I can run. And I had a pair of running shoes with me that I just kind of wore to the gym, and I laced them up. Didn't have a clue what I was doing, didn't eat anything. I was a little bit hungover as well. And I went to a place called Stanley Park, which is by the waterfront in Vancouver. One of the most beautiful places I've ever been to. And yeah, just as the sun came up, sort of tried my absolute best to see how far I could go. I scraped about 12K, and you could put a gun to my head, I wouldn't have gone any further. So it's a very interesting experience. I think it did help being in such a beautiful place, but I just thought, you know what, it isn't as tough as I thought. And it was just something to do while I was away. I obviously didn't have a gym while I was there. It was pretty hectic, the schedule. I did that and go, you know what, that wasn't as bad as I thought. It was a lot worse. And I really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed, as a way to see a city as well. I thought that was fantastic. And so went about my day. Following morning, 5 a.m, did the same thing again. But significantly slower due to my legs. It was one of those pivotal points. I really remember it. It was the first thing I ever posted on Strava as well. And I've got it screenshotted, and I have it in my sort of favorites because it was a little reminder of exactly where I was, exactly what that sort of moment was. And from then I was like, you know what? There's a way of doing this. You don't have to look a stereotypical runner. You don't have to, be super light. You don't have to try and do these things for the purpose of setting time, setting, races and whatnot. And I always thought to be a runner, you had to, go run marathons, go run events. And then as I got back to the UK, I sort of kind of kept doing 1 or 2 runs a week, nothing crazy far. Learning more about running, reading books on it, and understanding things like what easy pace was, which is very foreign to me at the time, going from a sporting background. And so I just got into it. Then COVID hit, and I was like, oh, this is perfect timing to actually do this. And I think there's definitely a benefit of there not being any pressure, because I think it's easy these days. You see a lot of people on social media training for a marathon, a half marathon, ultra, and it's very easy to get caught up in this whole idea that you have to do those things in order to be a runner, or you have to be working towards a race to be a runner. And I think the fact that there was no pressure on just meant for, my first official running event I went to was last year. So for about 2.5 years, I just ran because I wanted to get better at running. I ran because I enjoyed it. I ran because I wanted to really build some strong foundations. I can see myself running, well into my later years. And I always saw those blokes who, a bit later on in life, who could run still. And I always thought it was very admirable. They're able to get up and do this thing. And there's me in my 20s not being able to run. Really sparked it for me. So I thought it was just a fantastic thing to try and get into and do. And over time, I just for about a year, ran easy 3 times a week, maybe change the distance a little bit. Not trying to do anything too hard. And I think from setting that as a strong foundation point, I mean, that's why, now I'm doing these ultra distances and I'm feeling pretty good doing them. I've never had an injury through running, touch wood. And I think having a solid foundation and not having to feel this need to push myself too hard, too early when going through this journey of running. And yeah, I've built up, I ran sort of during COVID my own marathon just because I wanted to see what it felt like going that distance. And that was enjoyable. So I thought, when events are back on, I'll go run a marathon for an event to see what an event's like. I mean, things like bib collection, didn't know what that was. I just got popped up there thinking, I'm running a marathon today. And like, people are like, oh, did you go to the expo yesterday? I'm like, what's the expo? It's new to me. I've just kind of done my own thing for a few years and sort of been in my own little running world. And I absolutely loved it. I love the atmosphere of these events. It does make a difference when you're at an event and there's, the streets are lined with people sort of clapping and cheering and you're surrounded by the runners. But at the same time, I started doing this on my own and, cheering for myself, I guess. And I think I'm absolutely fine, doing both there. But no, now sort of realizing, I didn't, like when I started doing this, I didn't even know what the marathon majors were or like what the big marathon, I knew London had a marathon, but I was very naive in that sense. But I felt that there's the benefit to that being, I didn't get caught up in this whole, I've got this race coming up, I need to train for this thing here. It was just a case of, I enjoy the process behind it. And, if I want to continue doing this, you have to enjoy that process. I think there's often a lot of expectation can come with training for a race and maybe things don't go well and the pressures that come with that. Whereas for that period of time, there was zero pressure. It was just a case of, we'll run this far today and it'll take as long as you want to do it. And as a result, I really fell in love with the process. I learned more about, running mechanics, stride lengths, gait analysis, all this kind of stuff. Long before I had any intention of going to an event. So it was a real nice way. And I think, COVID was a big time for a lot of people to get into running because, the busyness of life, going to the office, going to work, I think it prohibits people, spending a good amount of time on their running, trying to come back from work after a long day and say, I've got to lace up to do 10K. It's like, especially the weather here, or even, I've got to wake up whatever time in the morning to run before going to the office. It's like, it's not the most conducive environment for trying to get better at running. So COVID, I think, was an absolute blessing for a lot of people, myself included.
I think coming from the background you came from as well, and I've seen this with a few people that have kind of come from a more lifting focused background. Lifting's one of those things that unless there's structure, you're not going to progress, right? You have to progress in the correct way, otherwise things just aren't going to happen. And coming from that background and then going into running, it sounds like you kind of put that perspective into running. It was like, look, I know I need to do this to get better, so I'm just going to kind of lace up my trainers every day and go out and do it. How did you go about balancing that lifting and running right at the beginning, and then talk me through kind of how you do that now?
At the beginning was very different because this is going into it without, I've been pretty good with my nutrition around strength training. Running nutrition is completely different. So, in my head is like, there's a certain amount of carbs you need in per day, but always, looking at things like your body weight, composite, those sort of things kind of, I'd hold on to them quite a lot. Whereas with running, I just didn't understand or realize how many carbs you go through, like, understanding, what bonking on a run was, all these things. I didn't really, it took me a while to get my head around gels. I was like, do I need them, do I not? And then like over time, like, obviously the nutrition side of it changes. Yeah. But then balancing lifting and running, I think it's something I've managed to get a pretty good knack for. Most of the stuff I talk about on my channel is linked to, being able to do both. And again, it's not about, I always say, like they say, a lot of people talk about, why do you run if you're not going to, end up doing, this or run particularly faster? Same way with the gym. Well, I always flip the analogy to the gym. It's like, you don't go to the gym to try and compete at anything. You go there to better yourself, to increase your strength, increase your muscle mass, if that's what you're after. You do it for it's the benefits of the action rather than there's an end goal. You may set short-term goals and you want to hit this lift number or you want to be able to do X. Whereas with running as well, like it was a case of, no, it's good for my health. I enjoy the process of doing it. It clears my mind. It's very different to lifting as well, where you're having to, with running, you're constantly, pushing yourself further. But lifting, you do something and you have a few minute break and it's quite nice and relaxing. I never found it too taxing, to be fair. Whereas running is a very different type of challenge. And, it's one of those things that I think for many years I resented runners because I was like, well, because I couldn't do it. I'd always look at them and be like, what do they know? What do they got there? And ultimately, it's a very different mindset to it. But again, I think there's no danger in doing both. I think both things are fantastic for you. I think they can fit hand in hand. One helps the other. I've seen a lot of people in the gym space, in the gym world, who are phenomenally strong. Can shift a lot of weight, but they would get gas walking up a set of stairs. And I definitely didn't want to be that guy. As much as maybe when I was sort of 16, 17, looking at, bodybuilders thinking, oh God, it'd be great to look like that. At the same time, you understand that everything comes with a cost, everything comes with a sacrifice. As you get to certain points, you realize with lifting a hand, you're almost chasing, this idea that really isn't what you thought it was.
I think there will be people watching this now as well that are probably in that same headspace as you maybe were back then, and kind of thinking to themselves, oh yeah, and you would have heard this loads, I can't run. Yeah, I can't run. There's no point because I can't run. And the thing is, everybody can run. It just takes time. It just takes time, right?
100%. And that's the thing about running, is no one is born a great runner. Everyone's got to train their aerobic systems. Everyone's got to train their anaerobic systems. I always find it really interesting, especially when people say, "Oh, I'm not built for running."
Yeah. So
human beings are fantastic endurance animals. We all technically are built for running, just not very fast. It's that ability. So I think it was a case of seeing that over those years of gaining a lot of strength and developing competence and confidence through the gym, it was okay, well, let's see where that can be applied to elsewhere. And I think now, with regards to balancing, I think it can be a delicate one, because if you go trying to do too much too soon, you see a lot of people sort of burn out pretty fast. And it is hard because there's two very different demands. You're dealing with two completely different sets of adaptations on the body with two completely different sets of stimulus, which requires a lot of nuance around the two. So I think at the start I was sort of going the deep end. I would run, and then I'd have a bit of food and go to the gym. I didn't realise that I was sucking at both for a considerable period of time. So structure's definitely in there. So now it's a case of I generally train twice a day. I'll keep those sessions 8 hours apart, so I can have a good amount of time to start recovering from one session, make sure I fit in between those two different meals. And some days when I don't be able to do two, I'll do one session one day, one session the next day. But it also depends on, what is it I'm currently training for at the moment. My volume's sort of 90, 100K a week with running, so that's quite a high demand, which kind of means that this lifting I'm doing is merely to support the running. And then when I finish this block and the event, my next sort of block will be a rebuild, going into focusing on strength primarily, with enough running to sustain, my cardio. And again, not trying to do everything at once. I think it's quite an important message when it comes to trying to lift and run, because it's easy to see people, smashing lots of weights, lifting, being very strong, and also, be able to run really far and really fast. It's like they got there because, they periodise exactly what they were doing at that time. So focus on one, do enough of the other, then you swap the focus, do enough of the other. And it's kind of worked out for me pretty well. I'm more or less lifting the same amount of weight I was a few years ago. My numbers haven't gone up, but that's not really been my intention. It was just to maintain strength and size and performance in the gym. But what has gone up is my ability to, throw down 100K runs when needed, and not put myself into a hole for a few weeks afterwards. So I think it's definitely, applying certain things in the gym. I think with gym strength training, it's great to be able to build strength and great to have that. But I always feel like you need to put it towards something. I'm not saying strength equals running performance, but it's definitely nice to be able to, do something in the gym for such a long period of time and then turn your attention to something like running and go, hey, in a minute, in what ways can I benefit from this?
Yeah.
And I think definitely, years of strength training has helped things like all my joints, knees, ankles, hips. Never had a single problem with this, even with the amount of volume I'm doing at my size. I think a lot of that is down to years of building up resistance in those areas. And make them rather resilient, because again, I'm forever hearing people talking about, especially new runners getting into it, maybe going too hard too soon, and then they've got a knee issue, and then they've got an ankle issue, and all these things here. And I was curious, thinking, when's that going to happen for me? And again, we're 3.5 years in now, and I'm trying to push myself as much as I can, and things are still working fine. So we'll see.
Isn't it amazing how the body adapts though? Like when you put different stimulus on it, it just adapts, and it's a mad thing we live in, right?
It honestly is incredible what you can do, especially when I think with progress is one of those wonderful things where you can look back and think, hey, a minute, a few years ago I wouldn't even thought this was possible. The first time I went out for that 12K, thinking, God, this is a big long run. My body was throwing everything it had at it, and then a few years later, it's 12K is a pretty normal run day now, and it's like, it's actually fascinating how if you just apply yourself continuously over time, don't have to make massive gains in a short period of time. Just continuity and just continuously going at it. It's incredible how the gains they just sort of stack up over time. And again, it's not to say you don't have times where you sort of put your foot off the gas pedal a little bit and take a bit of time to allow your body to fully recover and recharge. But at the same time, it's fascinating how the body can, apply a certain stimulus, it will adapt. You put the work in, it does have a direct result. I think there's a big part of me is always like wanting to almost prove it wrong, going, right, let's keep putting stimulus on it. And maybe it doesn't adapt. And, I've been proven wrong every time. So
to break yourself. I know you will have probably got a note on your phone with hundreds of different ideas of challenges and things that you want to do. I say that because I'm that sort of person as well that is constantly making notes, constantly having thoughts. When was the first kind of fire lit behind this challenge that you're going to face in the next couple of months? Run the Tube.
Oh God, it was a long time ago, actually. It was. I'm going back. I remember when I was younger. I would go on the London Underground with my dad or mum or whatever, and I was thinking these trains were awfully long. And I remember years ago mapping out, because I'm from Luton originally, but I lived in Cambridge for quite a lot of my sort of adolescence. And when I go to London and seeing this thing, I think these trains are astronomically long. And I remember when I was like 15, 16, actually like mapping out the tube route on an actual map, just because I was interested to see how far they were. And that's always, I remember doing that. I'm not sure what the purpose of doing that was, but I do recall doing it. I think it was on a school project or something that I've always been sort of buried in my mind, tube. So when I've obviously living in London 3-4 years now, I was always fascinated by okay, where do these things start and end? Because actually very rarely do you end up at the end of a line. Most of the time you use sort of the middle bits. I just thought, this is kind of fascinating. And it was, as I was getting into running, I think it was last year, I was training for 100K and I was doing a lot of runs around London. I always like to change up my long run routes. I'm not a big fan of running the same sort of areas. And I was noticing, what if I follow up, because I live in Balham on the Northern Line. And one day I followed it all the way up through Central and up then to North London. And I was thinking, okay, this is actually quite interesting sort of concept here. And it's been stuck in my mind ever since. And then start of this year, I started making out sort of routes through Strava and seeing how far they would go. And I noted the distance of track of the London Underground is like 350K, I think. So in my head, I was going, it's 350K. That's what it's at. Big distance. I then sort of convinced myself I could do it. And then I mapped it and realized that above ground, it's significantly further because the train tracks generally run straight, the roads don't follow it, and you've got to make a lot of detours. So when I actually came around to mapping the whole thing and adding it all up, and I was like, oh God, this is significantly further. And I thought I'd already sold myself on the idea of it because I was like, actually, it's in London, it means I've got a lot of support from friends and coaches and whatnot to do it here. My last ultra was in America about 2 months ago, and I did with some great friends from America. At the same time, it was like, it's nice to do these things where your people necessarily are. So remember that I finished about 6 p.m. Most of my friends and family were in bed, so I was waking them up with a FaceTime, being like, "Oh, no, I've finished." Yeah. And it was actually a bit like, with these sort of events, it's they're wonderful things to do for your own personal reasons, but it's also an amazing way to bring friends and family together for certain occasions. And for me, it was one of those like, okay, London sort of suits. I live here; it's my city. It makes sense. I train here, I run here. I'm very familiar with most routes around the city. And it kind of drew in my head. I wasn't sure I was going to do it, but it was in about March time. I said, you know what, if we're going to do it, you may as well do it this year, because I had one other ultra plan, which is the American one. It's only a 50 miler, and it was more just for a case of I can use that as a part of the training for this tube project and just go straight into it. So got a few partners on board with it. And yeah, I just built, the more I spent building out the idea and thinking in my head and then running different tube lines as well, I was like, you know what, this can be done. The only downside is like it's a lot of the routes are significantly busier than most of the ultra routes. You are dealing with London traffic, air pollution, curbs, tourists, cars, buses, cyclists. Unfortunately, the pace I'll be going at for this is not going to be that sort of super agile, like bouncing around everywhere. It's going to be a slug. Like it's going to be a real grind out, which I'm absolutely fine with. And really looking forward to getting it through. But it just also means that there's a lot of parts of London I haven't explored yet. I was unaware the Metropolitan line went all the way out to God, it's near Aylesbury he goes out to. So I learned a lot about the underground as well.
272 stations. Where are you starting? Which station are you starting at?
We're going to start, the Northern Line is going to be day one.
Okay.
This is what we're choosing at the moment, is which end do we start of a lot of these lines. So I think we're going to start at the north side because it's slightly more downhill. That's day one. That is 70 kilometres, I believe, from the Northern Line if you do every station. So yeah, I think we're going to start right at the top in High Barnet and then work our way down. And then it splits the two at the top, so we have to go down one end, then we get on the train, go back up, and then go down again. So it's there's definitely a lot of parts of London I haven't explored yet, which I'm very excited to run through. And yeah, so we're just trying to suss out. We've got the route sorted, just work out which is the best strategy from where do we start. Looking at, even though London's pretty flat, there's still obviously advantages and disadvantages to that. We've got the route sort of laid out. We've got the days which one's going to happen on. We've structured it so it's a high volume day, which is sort of like 50, 60k plus. So there's quite a few of those. There's 92. I've got the board next to me with everything on here. So it goes from 70k to 31k to 72k to 23k to 84k to 30k to an 80k to 3k, which is the Waterloo City. And then we've still got, another 84, another 92, and a 70k to be done as well. So there's a significant amount of volume between. We're going to space them out. So we've got a very high volume day, a lower volume day. I don't like to particularly call a 30k a low volume day.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say that.
Yeah, exactly. When I was routing, I was going, oh look, this day's only 30k, and the reality of doing it, going, hang on a minute, 30k is still a long old way to run in a day. So no, I'm looking forward to it, and it does pose some unique challenges with regards to an event. Logistics wise, do we have support vehicles, but then there's traffic, or do we just use bicycles? What's the best way of doing it? And because it hasn't really been done like this before. I mean, there's a few people I've seen who run the lines on different days, and they've done it over different periods of time. There's only one person I believe who's actually done it in 11 days. And I'm trying to work out exactly how they managed to do it all as RE support. But the good thing about it is, well, you're in London. So if you need anything, you can kind of just get it along the route. You don't have to worry too much about buying this or having this thing here, because much in the same way you've got people doing sort of John O'Groats to Land's End runs, most of that running is done in the middle of nowhere. Whereas if you need something, it needs to be at the support vehicle.
Yeah.
With this, ultimately, there's a Sainsbury's or a Tesco's on pretty much every street. So you can kind of get what you need in that sense. You don't have to sort of worry about hauling everything with you. You can improvise a lot on the go. And as long as you know what works for your nutrition, you can kind of go off of what's already there. I mean, I'm very blessed to have a bit of an iron stomach when it comes to this sort of stuff. On the last ultra, the last aid station, someone had very kindly prepared a really spicy chili con carne.
Oh, nice.
Everyone's turning their nose up at, and I thought, you know what, I fancy it. And it went down an absolute treat. So I haven't found anything yet that my body rejects on these runs. So yeah, while that's the case, the beautiful benefit of running through London, there's a lot of Gales bakeries, which I'm more than happy to clear out. Good chassis in there. And failing that, I'll have obviously everything else, gels wise on me. But no, there are some pros and cons to doing an event like this in London. I'm slightly concerned. Curbs is my biggest thing.
Yeah.
My legs. I trip over things like I was outside of Sainsbury's yesterday, and I managed to trip over the smallest raised curb. And I hadn't even run yet that day, so I'm just very conscious of that and just making sure, kind of being careful of the ground in front of me, make sure I'm not, dragging my feet at all. And yeah, just going from there really. But I've definitely run across worse terrain on trail races before, and this just poses another unique challenge to it.
It's just managing ultra brain, isn't it? That thing that you get after a little bit of time. And it's interesting they're saying, 30k is a, not going to say rest day, but a lower volume day. Yeah. Not the case when it's necessarily sandwiched between a 70k and a 90k day. It's not going to feel like that, is it? Which, mate, I absolutely love this challenge because it does pose obviously all of these logistical issues as well, which you don't get with if you're just going to go, right, I'm going to go and do a 150k race somewhere, because you don't have to do anything other than turn up on the start line. Whereas with this, you are planning absolutely everything. One thing that I do really like is that you mentioned kind of being in London, kind of having things on the route. Also, hopefully that means you can have a lot of support on the route in terms of people, because it feels like you're building an incredible community right now.
Oh, absolutely. No, that's a huge part of it as well. Is I wanted to do something that people can join me on. It's with these sort of events, I think it's a wonderful thing to be able to support people who are doing it. I've supported lots of friends doing other types of events in the past. I mean, even next week, I'm going to Bristol to support a friend who's running John O'Groats to Land's End. And that's actually the closest point we interact. So I was like, it makes a world of difference having people come support you. I mean, I had a few friends join me on the 100K last year because that was Putney to Henley. So it's quite easy for friends to get to. And that was the biggest mood lift you can imagine through these things. So, the London running community is a really special place. There's so many people active in the sport, active within the community. Recently started run clubs that we're now getting sort of 60, 70 people weekly turning up to run pretty long distances too, which I'm amazed by. It's incredible. And the beauty about this event is, you don't have to travel to find me. I'm coming through everyone's neighborhood. So the concept behind it is, maybe there's a time during the morning when I'm going from past your station to Central, use it as a run commute for the day, or even run commute home. It's incredible. That makes a world of difference. Having people, see my content and interact with me as an opportunity to run with them, whether that's for a kilometer, a station, a couple stations, or if somebody wants to join me for the entire day, absolutely fine with that. If there's anyone out there who wants to run 80K with me on one of the days, by all means, more than welcome to join me on that. I think that's a huge part of it as well, especially going through a lot of areas of London. I mean, London's got some pretty amazing places to run in, but I think it's also got a lot of places that people don't typically run in as well. And I'm looking forward to going through different areas, getting to grips with them. I mean, recently I've done a few different lines recently that, going through areas that typically aren't, you don't see people posting on social media that they're running through. And I think I'm more interested in going through those areas. And, if anyone followed me from those areas, then coming out with them. I think that's an important factor too, because again, as much as I guilty of it, just running through the same old neighbourhoods and, Battersea Park, Hyde Park, traditional running spots of London, I think, it's good to be able to get out and go to newer places that maybe people haven't explored before with regards to running.
We'll finish with this, man, because there's a lot to do before you stand on that start line, and your head is going to be incredibly busy knowing you've got to run hundreds of kilometers and over 250 stations. Where do you think your headspace is going to be, and how are you going to be feeling standing on that start line?
I've been thinking about this a lot recently, and same way I break down any race, you just got to get to the next bit. So in my mind, I've just got to get to the next station. That's it. Don't have to worry about anything else. I'm going to worry about what I'm going to do the afternoon, what I'm going to do the next day. That's another day's business. All I've got to worry about that day is getting to the next station. And, it's only a few kilometers away. I always think about how bad you feel, how rough shape you're in. If you dig down inside you, you've got a few K in you still to go. The amount of times I've been wiped at events and said to myself, you dig deep, you've got something more in you. You just need to get to that last point. You've always got that in you. And I think you just got to tap into that again and again and again, and not think at the start line, shit, I've got to run 570K here. Just think, I've got to run to the next station. And then the next station, I'll deal with that. But right now, that's the only thing in my mind, is just that one day at a time, one tube line at a time, one station at a time, and just take it like that.